No nanny could survive a day with the Billionaire's triplets, until the black woman did this. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the Whitmore mansion, followed by screams that seemed to come straight from hell. When Kesha Williams walked through the golden gate of that $50 million estate, she found three 6-year-old boys turning the living room into a battlefield. Red paint dripped down the white walls like blood. Crystal furniture lay in pieces on the Italian marble floor, and silk pillow feathers floated through the air like dirty snow. But what shocked Kesha the most wasn't the destruction. It was the pure hatred in those children's eyes. "Another black nanny," yelled Tyler, the leader of the triplets, throwing a toy truck directly at her feet. "Daddy said, you're cheaper." Kesha was 32 years old and had never imagined that her career as a preschool teacher would lead her here. With a degree in education from Howard University and a specialization in childhood trauma, she had spent 10 years working in community centers helping at-risk children. But nothing had prepared her to face three privileged white boys who had turned terrorizing nannies into a sadistic sport. "You won't last an hour," Dylan sneered, throwing paint on the wall behind her. The last one ran out, crying after 15 minutes. The third triplet, Mason, remained silent, watching Kesha with calculating eyes as if assessing the best way to break another adult. Wait, could this be the moment everything changes? Margaret Whitmore, the billionaire mother, appeared at the door with her usual expression of superiority frozen on her Botoxed face. "Miss Williams, as you can see, my children are energetic. 17 nannies have quit in 6 months. The last one was a Harvard graduate and left in tears." Kesha nodded calmly, watching the chaos around her. "I understand completely, Mrs. Whitmore." "I hope you're tougher than the others," Margaret continued, adjusting her $200,000 pearl necklace. "After all, for what we're paying," she left the sentence hanging with a condescending smile that clearly said, "You should be grateful for this opportunity." What Margaret Whitmore didn't know was that Kesha had grown up on the south side of Chicago, where children traumatized by urban violence expressed their pain through aggression far more intense than any rich kid's tantrum. She recognized the signs immediately. These boys weren't demons. They were wounded children desperately testing boundaries. While Tyler threw more toys and Dylan continued his destructive art with paint, Kesha did something none of the previous 17 nannies had done. She knelt down on the floor in the middle of the chaos and began building something with the scattered wooden blocks. "What are you doing?" Mason asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Building a fort," Kesha replied calmly, stacking the blocks with precision. "Every war needs a strategic headquarters." The three boys stopped destroying for a moment, intrigued by the unexpected response. Margaret watched from the doorway with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. How dare this woman ignore the destruction and play on the floor as if it were normal? But Kesha knew exactly what she was doing. In her eyes shone a quiet determination forged by years of dealing with situations that this privileged family could never imagine. She had a plan. And if this story of prejudice and overcoming adversity is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Black Voices to find out how a simple decision to kneel on the floor would turn into the most unexpected turnaround the Whitmore would ever witness. Margaret watched from the doorway with growing irritation as Kesha completely ignored the chaos around her and continued stacking blocks with disconcerting calm. How dare this woman act as if total destruction was normal? "Miss Williams," Margaret said, her sharp voice echoing through the room. "I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. My children have just caused approximately $20,000 worth of damage to antiques and artwork." Kesha looked up briefly, nodded understandingly, and returned her focus to building the fortress. "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Whitmore. $20,000 worth of broken objects, but 3 broken hearts are priceless, aren't they?" Margaret's face hardened. The audacity of this woman was unbelievable. "My children do not have broken hearts, Miss Williams. They are spoiled and undisciplined. They need firm boundaries. Not this excessive tolerance." At that moment, Richard Whitmore stormed into the room. At 45, the real estate mogul was known for his impatience and explosive temper. He stopped abruptly when he saw the state of the room, his veins bulging in his forehead. "Margaret, what the hell is going on here?" His eyes scanned the wreckage before landing on Kesha, still kneeling on the floor. And who is this? The new nanny, Margaret replied with an exaggerated sigh. Miss Williams, this is my husband, Richard Whitmore. Richard sized Kesha up with the same look he used to appraise properties before buying them for his own. How much are we paying for her? The way he said it, her as if Kesha were a commodity, didn't go unnoticed. But Kesha continued building, seemingly immune to the disrespect. $3,000 a week, Margaret replied. I thought that would be enough for someone with that profile. Richard laughed dismissively. 3,000? Margaret, you're being too generous. I bet she's never seen that much money in her life. Tyler, who had stopped throwing toys to watch the adults' conversation, sensed the tension in the air. Dad, she's ignoring our war. Of course she is, said Richard, adjusting his $8,000 Rolex. People like her learn early to bow their heads and accept any situation to keep their jobs. Then Kesha did something unexpected. She stopped building, stood up gracefully, and walked over to a broken bookcase. She picked up a book that had survived the destruction and leafed through it carefully. The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain, she said, her calm voice cutting through the tense air. Interesting story about two boys who switch places and discover that true nobility has nothing to do with money or birth. Richard and Margaret exchanged confused glances. Why was this woman talking about literature when she should be apologizing for the children's mess? I grew up reading that book in public libraries, Kesha continued, putting the book back in its place. My grandmother always said that the difference between rich people and decent people is that rich people buy books to decorate their shelves, but decent people read them to decorate their souls. The silence in the room was palpable. The triplets had completely stopped their destructive activities, fascinated by the strange calm of this woman who was not intimidated by their parents. Margaret felt a twinge of irritation. How dare this babysitter lecture her in her own home? Miss Williams, she said, her voice, I see. We didn't hire you to philosophize about literature. Your predecessors quickly understood what their role was here. Oh, yes, Kesha replied, returning to her block fortress. The 17 who ran out. I imagine none of them asked why 3 intelligent, healthy children feel the need to destroy everything around them. Richard stepped forward, clearly annoyed. Listen here, Mississippi. I don't know what kind of cheap psychology you learned at whatever community college you attended, but we don't need analysis here. We need discipline. Kesha smiled softly. A smile that carried years of experience dealing with powerful men who underestimated black women. Howard University. Actually, education with a specialization in childhood trauma. But you're right about one thing. Discipline is important. The question is, what kind of discipline teaches a child to respect? Or what kind teaches a child to fear? The comment hit Richard like a slap. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone he considered inferior. You have a very sharp tongue for someone in your position, he said, his voice low and threatening. That's when Mason, the quietest of the triplets, surprised everyone. He had quietly approached the fortress Kesha was building and was now observing the structures with genuine curiosity. How did you know you needed a bigger base for taller towers? He asked, his childish voice breaking the adult tension. Kesha knelt down again, coming up to Mason's eye level. I learned that from my little brother. He loved to build things, but they always fell down until we learned that solid foundations are more important than pretty walls. Where is your brother now? Mason asked, genuinely interested. Kesha's face softened with a shadow of sadness. He died when I was 15. A stray bullet in a neighborhood shootout. The room fell silent. Tyler and Dylan moved closer, drawn by the raw honesty of her revelation. Margaret and Richard glanced at each other, clearly uncomfortable. They hadn't expected the conversation to take such a personal turn. Is that why you're not afraid of our mess? Dylan asked, her voice small and curious. I'm not afraid because I've seen kids who've been through much worse than you, and they still manage to find their way back to the light. The 3 of you are stronger than you realize. Richard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Well, that's very touching, but it doesn't change anything. My children still need to learn how to behave themselves. I completely agree, said Kesha, standing up. Proper behavior starts with adults showing mutual respect. Children are just mirrors of what they see around them. Margaret felt her blood boil. Are you implying that we are responsible for their behavior? I'm saying that children learn more from what they observe than from what they hear. And what they've observed over the last few months is 17 adults giving up on them as soon as things got tough. The truth of those words hit everyone in the room. The triplets looked down, remembering every babysitter who had promised to stay and then run away. Richard, sensing that he was losing control of the situation, decided to resort to outright intimidation. Miss Williams, let me be very clear. You work for us, not the other way around. If you can't handle my children the way we want them handled, you can pack up your things and leave right now. Kesha stared him down, her eyes flashing with a determination that made Richard instinctively back down. It was the same look she had held for years while facing racist police officers, prejudiced teachers, and entire systems designed to make her fail. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice calm, but loaded with quiet strength. You are absolutely right. You can fire me at any time, but as long as I'm here, I'm going to treat your children like human beings, not problems to be solved. She turned to the boys, who were watching her with a mixture of admiration and hope that no adult had seen in their eyes in months. How about we finish our fort, boys? I have some ideas about drawbridges that might work better than throwing toys to keep enemies out. For the first time in months, the triplets smiled genuinely. Not the mischievous smiles of children planning mischief, but the pure smiles of children who had just found someone who truly saw them. Margaret and Richard left the room huffing indignantly, but not before Margaret whispered something that Kesha heard perfectly. That woman won't last a week. Mark my words. What Margaret Whitmore couldn't imagine was that Kesha had survived far worse than the arrogance of a wealthy family. And every word of contempt only fueled a silent determination that was about to transform that house in ways no one could have predicted. 3 days after the initial confrontation, Kesha had completely transformed the routine of the house. The triplets, who had previously spent their mornings destroying furniture, now woke up early to help her in the kitchen. She had implemented what she called special missions, activities that channeled the children's destructive energy into constructive projects. Today, we're going to build a bridge that can hold all the toy cars without collapsing, she announced, spreading materials across the dining room table. Tyler, who had become closest to her, raised his hand enthusiastically. Can I use the toothpicks to make the main towers? Sure, Architect Tyler. And you, Dylan, can calculate how many marshmallows we need for the joints. Margaret watched from the kitchen door with growing irritation. How did this woman get her children to cooperate when 17 nannies with degrees from prestigious universities had failed miserably? Richard, she whispered to her husband, who was reading the Wall Street Journal without paying attention. We need to talk about this nanny. What's wrong with her? The boys are quiet. They're not breaking anything, and she hasn't quit yet. We should be happy. That's exactly the problem. She's changing their behavior too much. They're becoming different. Richard finally looked up from his newspaper. Different? How? Yesterday, Tyler asked me if I knew how many people worked at our company and if they had children. Dylan wanted to know why our house was so big when it only had 5 people. And Mason drew a picture of a family with a black woman holding their hands. Margaret's voice rose in panic. This is unacceptable. We hired her to control them, not change them. But what if this change is the key to their happiness? Could Kesha's approach hold the secret to saving these boys? Meanwhile, Kesha had discovered something disturbing about the Whitmore family. During a seemingly casual conversation with Mason while they were building the bridge, the boy had revealed information that alarmed her. Kesha, Mason had whispered, looking nervously around him. Do you think it's normal for Dad to yell at Mom every night when we think we're asleep? What do you mean, honey? They talk about money and people who are trying to destroy us. Dad always says that certain people don't deserve what they have and that he's going to teach someone a lesson. Kesha felt a chill run down her spine. How long has this been going on? Forever. Tyler joined the conversation. Sometimes Dad gets really angry and breaks things in his office. Mom says it's the fault of inferior people who don't know their place. Dylan nodded sadly. That's why we broke things, too. We thought that's how adults dealt with being angry. At that moment, Kesha understood that the triplets' destructive behaviors weren't spoiled tantrums. They were symptoms of a toxic home environment where emotional violence, discrimination, and abuse of power were normalized. That night, after putting the boys to bed, Kesha did something none of the previous nannies had done. She called her best friend, Dr. Jasmine Parker, a social worker specializing in child protection who worked for the city's social services department. "Jazz, I need some professional advice," Kesha whispered from the maid's room. "I'm working for a wealthy family, and there are clear signs of emotional abuse. The children are reproducing patterns of violence that they have clearly learned from their parents. Kesha, you need to document everything if you really believe there is abuse. Wealthy families have the resources to cover up any allegations. So, you would need very solid evidence." "I know, and that's why I'm calling you. Could you advise me on how to proceed legally? These children need protection, but I also need to protect myself. The parents have already shown racist tendencies and would not hesitate to destroy me if they knew I was investigating." Jasmine was silent for a moment. "Kesha, are you sure you want to do this? Families like that have the power to ruin lives. They can make false accusations against you, destroy your reputation. Jazz, I grew up facing entire systems designed to break me. If I can't use my position to protect 3 vulnerable children, then what good is all my education and experience? All right, I'll teach you how to document properly. Record conversations when possible. Keep a detailed journal with dates and times. Take discreet photos of any physical evidence. And Kesha, be very, very careful." Over the next few days, Kesha began to implement a carefully crafted plan. During the day, she continued to be the perfect nanny, gaining the boys' trust and observing their family patterns. At night, she meticulously documented every incident, every prejudiced comment, every sign of emotional instability she witnessed. Rosa, who had noticed the subtle change in Kesha's behavior, approached her one afternoon while the boys were napping. "Miss Kesha," she said quietly, "can I talk to you in private?" They walked to the garden away from prying ears. "You're doing something that none of the other nannies have done," Rosa continued. "You're really caring about these children, not just fulfilling obligations." Kesha nodded carefully. "They're good children, Rosa. They just need proper guidance." "I've worked here for 15 years, Rosa said, looking around to make sure they were alone. "I've seen a lot of things that worry me about how these children are being raised. If you ever need confirmation about certain situations, know that you're not the only one who's witnessed them." It was the alliance Kesha didn't know she was waiting for. Rosa, with her 15 years of silent observation, could be a crucial witness if the situation escalated. "Thank you, Rosa. That means a lot to me. These children deserve to grow up in a safe environment," Rosa whispered. "And you're the first person who's come here who really understands that." That night, after another violent argument between Richard and Margaret that the boys pretended not to hear, Kesha made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't there just to babysit. She was there to protect 3 vulnerable children from a dysfunctional family system that no amount of money could mask. As she organized her notes and recordings in the silence of the maid's room, a determined smile formed on her face. The Whitmores had completely underestimated who they were dealing with. They thought they had hired just another nanny desperate for money. What they didn't know was that they had brought into their home someone with enough knowledge, connections, and courage to expose truths that could shake the very foundations of their privileged existence. The next morning, as she prepared breakfast for the boys, who now greeted her with genuine smiles, Kesha knew that each additional day in that house brought her closer to having enough evidence for a move the Whitmores would never see coming. A move that would not only protect the children, but also reveal to the world who they really were behind their masks of social respectability. The perfect storm began on Monday morning when Kesha implemented the first phase of her plan. While Richard and Margaret ate breakfast discussing their next real estate investments, an unmarked van from the Department of Social Services pulled up in front of the mansion. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, announced Dr. Jasmine Parker, presenting her official ID. I am a social worker specializing in child protection. We have received detailed reports of possible emotional neglect and exposure of minors to psychologically harmful environments. Margaret nearly choked on her $15 cappuccino. Reports. What kind of reports? Jasmine opened a thick folder. Extensive documentation of systematic destructive behavior by the children, regular exposure to violent domestic conflict, and evidence that the guardians normalize racial discrimination and verbal abuse in the presence of the minors. Richard stood up abruptly, his face red with indignation. That's absurd. Who would dare make false accusations against our family? The evidence includes audio recordings, detailed reports with specific dates, and witnesses who witnessed the incidents, Jasmine continued calmly. We also have photographic documentation of property damage caused by the children as a manifestation of untreated emotional trauma. It was then that Margaret connected the dots. It was her, wasn't it? The nanny. That woman was spying on us. Kesha appeared at the kitchen door with the triplets, who now looked like completely different children, calm, smiling, affectionate. The transformation was so dramatic that Jasmine was visibly impressed. Good morning, Dr. Parker, Kesha said respectfully. As we agreed, the boys are ready for their individual interviews. They are eager to tell you how they feel at home. You planned this? Richard shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Kesha. You came into our home pretending to be a nanny to sabotage us. I came into your home to care for 3 traumatized children, Kesha replied with unruffled dignity. What I found was a systematic pattern of behavior that any child protection professional would be obligated to report. Margaret tried a different approach, forcing a fake smile. Dr. Parker, surely we can work this out between civilized people. Our family is well respected in the community. Mrs. Whitmore, Jasmine interrupted. Social standing is irrelevant when it comes to child welfare. The evidence we have received is too specific and detailed to be ignored. At that moment, Rosa appeared carrying a tray of coffee for the social worker. But instead of just serving, she did something unexpected. Dr. Parker, Rosa said in a clear voice, I have worked in this house for 15 years. If you need a witness to the patterns of behavior mentioned in the report, I can confirm every incident described. Rosa's betrayal was the final blow for Margaret. Rosa, how dare you? I dare to protect innocent children, Rosa replied with a dignity that 15 years of silent service had forged. I have watched these children suffer for months because the adults responsible were more concerned with appearances than with their children. Richard frantically pulled out his phone. I'm calling my lawyers. This is harassment, blackmail. Mr. Whitmore, Jasmine said calmly. Any attempt at intimidation or obstruction will be included in the official report. I recommend that you cooperate fully with the investigation. As the Whitmores panicked, the triplets naturally gravitated toward Kesha, seeking comfort and protection. The difference was striking. These were no longer the out-of-control children who terrorized nannies. They were normal boys who finally felt safe. Kesha, Tyler whispered, what's going on? Mom and Dad are really angry. Nothing for you to worry about, dear. Dr. Jasmine just wants to talk to you about how you feel. You can tell her the truth. It's okay. The formal investigation that followed revealed not only the domestic problems, but also financial irregularities that Richard had committed to maintain his extravagant lifestyle. Kesha's recordings, combined with Rosa's testimony and the boy's obvious transformation, created a solid case of emotional neglect. Margaret tried one last desperate gambit. You don't understand. That woman manipulated you. She used our children against us. Mrs. Whitmore, Kesha said, her calm voice cutting through the hysteria. I used my professional training to protect 3 vulnerable children. If that seems manipulative to you, perhaps you need to rethink what you consider appropriate parenting. The scandal leaked to the local media within 24 hours. The same society that once revered the Whitmores now watched them with scrutiny and judgment. Clients canceled contracts, the country club revoked her membership, and Margaret was quietly removed from all her positions with charitable organizations. As he watched his world crumble, Richard realized he had completely underestimated the woman he had despised. Kesha wasn't just a cash-strapped nanny. She was a skilled professional with connections, knowledge, and the courage to take on people far more powerful than herself. The triplets, protected by appropriate legal measures and under ongoing professional supervision, finally had a chance to grow up in an emotionally safe environment. But the story was far from over. As the Whitmores faced the consequences of years of arrogance and prejudice, one question remained. Was it possible for people so accustomed to privilege to learn true humility? Or are some lessons only taught through the total loss of what they value most? 2 years later, Kesha Williams stood on the main stage of the National Child Protection Conference, receiving the Professional of the Year award for her groundbreaking work with families in crisis. Her nonprofit organization had helped more than 300 children in situations similar to the Whitmore triplets. True child protection, she said into the microphone, begins when we stop blaming children for reflecting the toxic environments we create for them. In the audience, Rosa Martinez smiled proudly. After testifying in the Whitmore case, she had been promoted to supervisor at an ethical cleaning company that paid decent wages. Jasmine Parker, now regional director of social services, had implemented new protocols based on the case they had developed together. Meanwhile, the Whitmores faced a very different reality. Margaret had lost all her social positions and now worked as a salesperson in a department store. Richard, after financial investigations, lost his company and lived in a modest apartment, struggling to pay child support. The triplets, under court supervision, visited their parents on weekends, but lived with close relatives who provided emotional stability. Tyler had become a school monitor, helping younger children. Dylan had developed a talent for math, and Mason wrote stories about overcoming adversity. Sometimes, Kesha concluded her speech, the people who need to learn the most about humanity are those who believe that money makes them superior to others. Richard, watching on the television in his empty apartment, finally understood that he had completely underestimated an extraordinary woman. Kesha had not only protected his children, she had exposed truths that all his arrogance couldn't hide. True justice didn't destroy lives, it transformed them. While the Whitmores learned humility through loss, Kesha built a legacy based on protection, dignity, and proof that underestimating someone because of prejudice is the most costly mistake one can make. If this story of overcoming adversity and justice touched your heart, subscribe to Black Voices to discover more stories about how true strength emerges when we face entire systems with courage, knowledge, and unwavering determination.